The first speaker that we have for this session is Jeroen from Go Data Driven. He is going to be about Devcontainers. Jeroen, he's a machine learning engineer, and he works on putting machine learning models in production. He is also very active in the open source communities. He has worked for many open source packages. Yeah, his job is about containers. So we are looking forward for your talk, Jeroen. Please start.
Thanks, Dimitra. Nice. Well, thanks for the great introduction. And yeah, I'm very happy to see so many faces here to talk about Devcontainers. And before we dive into the talk, I would first like to see a show of hands. Who has worked with Devcontainers before? All right. Yeah, I see some hands there. Then another question: out of the people that have worked with Devcontainers, who has actively used it at their companies? Okay. Some less. Okay. Well, then I see many people that are unfamiliar still. So then that is great because we're gonna learn about it together today. All right, so first of all, about me, you already heard a little bit, but I'm a machine learning engineer at Go Data Driven, which is an AI and data consultancy company owned by Xebia, and I help companies take their machine learning applications into production. All right, so first of all, I want to sketch a little bit of a use case. I want you to imagine that you are setting up a new repository for a team and you have the following requirements. You want to make an analytics application, so you want to do big data processing with Apache Spark. So for that, you will need a system with the Java. Also, because you probably want to develop it in Python, we want to use PySpark, and then naturally also Python. So then we basically need to align with the team which Java version are we going to use, which Python version, and which PySpark version. And the reason why we need to do this is that if we don't do this, we don't get the guarantees that we want in production code. So whenever we go into production, you want to pin down the versions. And then for that reason, if everyone in our team uses different version, has different environments, different laptops, different operating systems, yeah, it can get a bit tricky. And maybe to further emphasize, okay, what can be potential problems here, I want to open up my Microsoft Teams window, and I have a couple messages coming in. So first, to get a message from Petra, the Python dev. She is saying, hey, my venv somehow got corrupted. It's saying no module named NumPy, even though I seemingly have it installed. Not sure how to fix. PS, this is also why I was not in the meeting. So yeah, pretty problematic. Petra missed a meeting because her venv got broken. Okay, this is costing us time. Next message from Eric, the old project maintainer. Hey, so I was working on maintaining the old project, just found out that some of the dependencies don't even work on my Mac OS version anymore. FML. Alright, so Eric, he happened to have, he has to work on an old project. Basically, the assumptions that were made when the project was initially developed, they didn't hold anymore. It was developed on some operating system, time went on, the operating system changed, but the environment was not fixed, so it doesn't work anymore. Right, next message from Billy Windows. I'm trying to Dockerize the project, but it's hard. Everything that works on my Windows laptop seems to fail on Linux. Alright, so another problem here. Billy is trying to go into production, but developed his project on a Windows machine, but now wants to deploy it on a Linux machine, and it doesn't match. Another message, this time from Johnny Jr. Hi, can you maybe run pip show PySpark? I'm curious which PySpark you are running. Because if it works for you, but not for me, and also not in the CI, maybe your environment is different than both. Just checking. In this case also, Johnny Jr. is kind of confused why it doesn't work for him, but it works for some developer. And then, yeah, the environments are not reproducible in this way. It's kind of this principle, works for me. Oh, but it works for me. Just do whatever I did on my system, but then didn't maybe document it or that type of stuff. So then another message, Johnny Jr. Good day, I'm new at the company and wanted to get started working on the repo. Tried following the README steps, but doesn't work. By any chance, are there any more detailed docs available for the project setup? No, right? Right, so Johnny is new at the company. He's trying to onboard, but finds that just following the README steps doesn't work. Maybe the documentation was written at some point, but then the environment changed again, not updating the docs. And then, yeah, without docs available, this is getting really hard. All right, so let's maybe line up what kind of issues did we run into. First, we had Petra. We had a corrupt virtual environment. Then Eric, the old project maintainer, he has outdated project dependencies with respect to the system or the environment that it was initially built for. Then Billy Windows, he has problems in containerization and going into production with a mismatch of systems with the development machine and the production environment. Then there was PySpark user, which was called Johnny Jr., but he was actually PySpark user, which has inconsistent environments between local development, the CI environment, production environment, and his other team members. So he wasn't sure, why does it work maybe for me and not in the CI and also not for you? There was inconsistencies here. And then Johnny Jr., he was trying to onboard, but there were no formal specifications of install steps. Maybe the preference would have been not following this incredibly long README, but having a formal specification to configure his environment, get started quickly, or maybe, yeah, at least have up-to-date docs. All right, so we have all these different users with different issues. How do we fix it? How do we get a reproducible dev environment? Well, the Devcontainers come to the rescue. So I'm going to show you, okay, how can we build a Devcontainer for this use case, and maybe why could it potentially be useful also for you? All right, so about the Devcontainers. We know Docker helps us create a formal definition of our environment. And then Devcontainers allow you to connect your editor to that container. So how that basically looks like is you have an editor. For example, this is VS Code. And then every interaction that you make, for example, running a test, doing debugging, or running commands in the terminal, they actually run inside the Docker container. And so this gives you the benefits of running a Docker container, which is it's reproducible. It's basically your environment very neatly defined in a Docker file, and then being able to reproduce that. And also in isolation. May you just mess up your environment, you can actually rebuild it, whilst still giving you the native development experience. So whilst still having VS Code there, which feels native still. So what does this mean? If it's reproducible, then it means we can onboard faster. Your dev environment has been defined neatly, it can be reproduced. You don't no longer have to say, okay, follow these 20 steps and maybe try to replicate my environment. But it's rather, okay, I have this script. It automatically configures your environment, which is the Docker file. Also, better alignment between team members, because whenever you want to change the environment, you have to reflect it also in your dev container, and therefore other team members can basically pull changes to the environment by pulling in your new Docker image. And also a smaller gap to production, which is because you're already maintaining this formal definition, you're already maintaining the Docker image. So if that is already built, you no longer run into the problems where you built it on one machine, you configured your one machine to be perfectly suited for your application, and now you have to go into production and Dockerize it. It kind of forces you to already do this. So what are the downsides? The downsides is you are introducing Docker, so you will have to be familiar with Docker, maybe know how to write a Docker file. Your system will have to support it, although it has very wide support. So this is one trade-off that you will make. You will introduce Docker, and you might get nice benefits for it in return. All right, so that said, let's see how do we actually build one. All right, so for this application that I previously mentioned, for which we need PySpark running in a Python environment, we have this project set up, which is just 2 Python files, a test file, and then 2 files explaining the requirements for our project. Very, very simple. And then we're actually adding a .devcontainer folder. So in this .devcontainer folder, we're adding 2 files, devcontainer.json and a Docker file. And we'll start with the devcontainer.json. I put in here the most minimal amount of JSON required just to create a dev container. We'll be extending it later. So in the devcontainer.json file, you can see there is a reference to a Docker file. This basically means to create my dev container, take this Docker file, which lives in the .devcontainer folder, and build it from within the working folder that is one parent folder up. So then, what does the Docker file look like? This is quite a lot of text. Let me focus on one thing. First, we're taking as a base Python 3.10, which is probably image familiar to you guys. And here we're installing Java. So we need Java in order to run all the Spark-related operations. Also, do 2 times pip install. First the requirements.txt file, and then the requirements dev file. And then we're also separating them because you might want to get only the production requirements when you're building a production image. All right, so that was pretty simple Docker file. Then now we actually already built like a most minimal specification of this dev container. So let's see, how do we open it? First, given that you have installed Devcontainers extension in VS Code, there's this command, which is called reopen in container, which you can execute to open the container, given that you have this .devcontainer folder in your project. And then at this point, it might be nice to notice, okay, people are seeing, ooh, okay, this is VS Code, right? I use PyCharm, or I use even another editor. So what is currently happening in this dev container space is that there's very, very heavy developments coming from the VS Code team to put the dev container specification into an open specification. So they're currently creating a specification that is agnostic for editors. So I'm also showing you this agnostic specification. It's really been heavy development in, well, the couple last months, year. So I'm showing you the specification that is agnostic for the editors, but still it will work only for VS Code now. So of course the hope is that this open specification will be supported by all the editors. Then basically you get your one Devcontainer specification, use any editor to open it. So they're really trying to push this to become like one standard. So because yeah, if it only works for VS Code, yeah, that's quite limited. We want just one nice specification to create and use Devcontainers. All right, going further now, just assuming the rest is in VS Code. Already also VS Code detects, okay, I think you have a Devcontainer configuration file here. Do you want to reopen it in the container? So it gives you this notification. Maybe I just click here, and then I can see, okay, I'm just open up the desktop now. There's VS Code here. Given that I push this button, it now says on the left bottom corner, opening remote. So basically it's reading in the files that we just created, seeing, okay, this Docker file, did I already create it? Do I have to pull in the base image, create this entire Docker file? Do I have it cached? Let's figure out all these things. So right here you can see, okay, it's pulling a couple layers, running additional steps for the layers that you don't have yet, installing everything, exporting to layers, make sure it's cached for the next time. Then basically here it's also showing you, okay, this is the system that we currently have. It's not Mac OS, but it was a Linux distribution to kind of show the proof. Then actually you can see on the left hand side the repo that we created. Yeah, it's also there, it's mounted. And then still running some additional commands until terminal opens. All right, so now in this terminal, maybe print the operating system. Okay, we're inside a Linux machine now. Maybe print Java because we wanted to install Java. Okay, there's Java now. So what I'm trying to show to you now, given that maybe you want to use a project with a very specific Java version, yeah, this could be a nice way to have it installed for new developers already. It's not like, okay, go to this website, go there, install Java. Yeah, you can develop inside the Devcontainer and have your entire specification already installed for you. Also, the Python version we specified, PySpark, it's there. All right, so naturally you can also rebuild. So yeah, given that you kind of mess up something, corrupt your environment, you can rebuild the image, get a fresh environment from the start. So that might help Petra, for example, who messed up her virtual environment. Right, so a lot of stuff was happening in the images that I was showing where we were opening the Devcontainer. What is happening else? Because a lot of things were actually happening already for us. So actually VS Code Server is being installed first on your Devcontainer. So what VS Code needs is it needs a way to talk to this container. So it will install actually VS Code, sort of open up a port, a bridge, to have communication with actually the running container and your local editor. So for that, it installs VS Code Server. And this also brings us to what is the requirement? Like what does your image need to support in order to have it usable as a Devcontainer? This is the most important requirement. Like whatever image you choose, it should be able to run VS Code Server. And as you may know, VS Code is running on a JavaScript engine, VS Code Server also, so your image needs to support Node.js for that reason. So a lot of images, they support Node. So VS Code will notice, okay, you don't have Node yet, install it, install VS Code Server, open up that connection so it can talk to your container. What else? Right, some config is copied over. your Git credentials, for example. So yeah, you don't have to reconfigure your username, email once you're actually developing inside this container. We copy it over just like SSH known hosts, just for convenience. And then also we do a couple of file system mounts. For example, we just saw that this container was opening, and then at some point our repo appeared. That is actually because it was opening like a file system mount. So whatever you edit inside the container, it is actually reflected on your file system. It's the same folder. And also VS Code workspace folder, so it gives you kind of some convenience options, so you're not opening a completely empty dev environment. All right, so given that we just specified our dev container, now we just have this Docker file, we have this devcontainer.json file. We can basically communicate, okay, this is all that's required to set up our development environment. So now actually we can also create like a nice little markdown button, which then takes your like a repo, which lives on GitHub, for example, and then tells VS Code to actually clone it and open it in a dev container right away. So you can do this by creating a URL, which is basically basing off the VS Code protocol, and then telling it clone in volume a certain URL. And this is just to show you, okay, it could be a quite nice option to have like a button in your repo, and you click it and it just opens your environment right away. Right, so on the left-hand side, I just put a README file which uses sort of conventional install steps. Okay, you have all the install steps here, and then you do all of this to kind of get started in the project. And then on the right-hand side, there's the setup with the button. Or at least you could say, okay, this works with the dev container. Open the repo, you can open up the dev container. So basically, you defined all your installation steps already in your Docker file. You have to keep the Docker file up to date. When you change the environment, teammates can pull it. This is basically like a shorter version with formalized install instructions. All right, so given that we created this quite basic dev container, how can we extend it? Like our devcontainer.json file is still really lightweight. So what is still missing? Maybe it's a good safety practice to install a non-root user. Maybe you want to pass in some custom VS Code settings to get the user started a bit more quickly. Well, we're doing Spark stuff, so it might be nice to access Spark UI as well. And then also, okay, given that we already Dockerized our development environment, could we also use it to run our CI steps like inside this image? Okay, let's see how we can do these extra steps. So starting with installing a non-root user. So for example, just to illustrate that indeed also pip is telling you this, it's always a good practice if you have a production image, just in the case this image gets hijacked, the hijacker has as little permissions as possible. So you want to kind of get the user that is basically running in the system, you want to give them as little permissions as possible. So also not to mess up the file system. It might be nice not to execute everything on root by default. So how do we do this? There's two Linux commands relevant for this: group add and user add. Basically add a new user called non-root in this case. And then this is the important part where we define in our devcontainer.json file with which username do we want to log into this container. All right, that's very nice. When we started now, we were connected as a non-root instead. All right, so let's see then how we can actually make this user experience a bit nicer for the user, not having them started with 0 settings at all. So here you can actually also see a bit where this open specification comes in. Before, actually, the assumption was made that everything was living inside VS Code. Now they kind of pulled out all the VS Code specific stuff, and they made this new key, which is called customizations, and then VS Code. So in the future, hopefully when more editors join this open specification, it will be customizations and then maybe also another editor, PyCharm, for example. Right, so what settings are we giving the user here? We're saying, okay, install the Python extension for us. Maybe when you want to do testing, for example, with PyTest, run it from this directory, unit test, PyTest, yeah, kind of configuring that, giving the user that already. That is nice. Let's see how can we access Spark UI. We're actually, yeah, opening up a port, which is 4040, giving it a label. That's nice. Now we actually can get the notification when this port is opened. Okay, maybe you want to open it, which is Spark UI. Right, so what about CI? Then there's two options here. Either we pre-build the image, we upload it somewhere to some registry, and then we use that as an image for our CI pipeline. Or within your CI pipeline, you build the image and then execute commands within this image. Let's go for the first option. The second option is a bit more complex, just to see, okay, how can we use CI with our Devcontainer? There's already a GitHub action for this. I'm kind of speeding up a little given the amount of time I have left, even though the clock is not giving me feedback. All right, so about this CI pipeline. First, we log into maybe registry of your choice, GitHub container registry. Then this is using this GitHub action that I showed before, which is devcontainers/CI. And then just run one simple command in this PyTest. So actually, we were opening our Devcontainer just now. It opened in VS Code. It was nice. We have this environment. Now running our continuous integration is using the same environment. So if you run PyTest on your local machine, then running your CI, it uses the same environment. This is kind of what I wanted to stress. That is nice. You have less chance that in your CI, oh shit, it works in my CI and not here. No, it's the same environment, so it's a bit less likely to go wrong. This is nice. It just shows like a GitHub action, the trace, where in the middle it says build and run Devcontainer task. All right. So what is the final definition? We have this entire devcontainer.json file with some keys: build, remote user, and the customizations, and then also the port attributes and forward ports. Then next there's the Docker file. We install Java, a non-root user, and we install the production pip dependencies and the development pip dependencies. So that was great. We have these two definitions basically. You get the QR code in the end. So if you want to play around a bit more with this little example we built, feel free to do that in the end. Scan the QR code. So let's look a bit over the horizon now. So we built this simple Devcontainer. I kind of explained to you, okay, what may be the benefits. What else is there? So like I said, you can mount directories. It already mounts one directory for you. But a pro tip is maybe you work on some cloud. You want to mount your cloud credentials so you don't have to log in on your local system and in the Devcontainer twice. There are also Devcontainer templates, already configured Devcontainer images for you, which have these non-root users already figured out. You can just get started a bit more quickly, maybe build upon that. There's also features, which is little snippets you can add. For example, you want to use the AWS CLI, Azure CLI. This are kind of like little snippets you can add to your Devcontainer image, just convenience. And then maybe most importantly, remote development. So there's also been this trend where you actually connect also your IDE to not a Docker container that's running locally, but running remotely. So this is actually exactly what GitHub Codespaces is. And GitHub Codespaces also integrates with the Devcontainer definition. So that is awesome. Actually, on GitHub, it already gives you this button. If you have a Devcontainer, do you want to open this in a GitHub Codespace? That is awesome. Your users don't even have to have an editor installed. Just edit in the browser itself. Yeah, sure, thanks. All right, so conclusion. Devcontainers allow you to connect your IDE to a running Docker container. This makes it reproducible and getting isolation whilst still getting a native experience. Reproducible means fast onboarding, better alignment with team members, and a smaller gap to production. Now it's only in VS Code, but an open specification is taking shape. So that said, Devcontainers might be able to help Petra or Eric, the old project maintainer, or Johnny Jr., but maybe even you. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for the great talk. Any questions?
Hi, thanks for your talk. I have one comment, and that's the Docker file that you showed doesn't really ensure that the different developers will have the same environment, because you always update your apt index before you install Java. So that's still something that you need to think about when you set this up, especially if you let developers build their own image. So maybe it's a suggestion to like prepare an image and deploy it somewhere that people can just pull without needing to like do these installs themselves.
Mm-hmm. That's a great comment. So yeah, indeed, I'll keep note. So thank you for that. Is there any other questions at the front?
So thank you for the talk. We are starting using it in my company, and the thing that happened is we had a container, it worked, and then sometime it break by someone who was not using it, push something, update some dependency, and now the container is broken. Do you have that, and is there any way to have that as part of the CI? Then it's get a big meta, right? So how do you test your Devcontainer as part of the CI?
Yeah, I liked how you already answered your question in the second part almost. It works the best if your entire team is working on Devcontainer. So indeed, you don't have these weird moments where it breaks. With the DCCI, indeed, this helps a lot. You can just see whether you broke the Devcontainer definition if your CI fails. So indeed. If you go to this template, you will see how to run it in CI as well. It works for GitHub Actions and Azure pipelines. I didn't implement this CI action myself, but it's out there. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks. I love Devcontainers. I think it's a really neat idea. And I would also like to run it remotely easily. What I now do in VS Code is I SSH use the SSH extension to go into a remote machine, and then I pull my code there, and then I can actually run the Devcontainer. So that's already quite cool. But I would like it even more if I can do that directly from my local machine, mount the source code in a container on Kubernetes or a VM or whatever, and then have an even smoother experience to develop in a remote machine and access more compute. Do you know if there is a solution around or being built for that use case?
So you're basically asking, okay, how can I get the same development experience that I would have like if using it locally, but then with like the power of using VMs, for example, with SSH connections. All right? Yeah, okay. So personally, I've also been kind of fiddling around with this remote development, but then I think whereas Devcontainers, this specification has been kind of has been converging a bit toward one open specification, agnostic of the editors. I think the remote development stage is even more like wild. So yeah, I couldn't get you like a solid recommendation on that one, but for sure, if you find out have nice new findings about like a proper workflow with VMs running on a cloud, for example, then share with me, please. So, but yeah, GitHub Codespaces is now a very good solution, but it's quite expensive. So.